What is all this about? Why is there this universe? Why is there this particular earth taking the form that it takes? What's my place in this universe?
Entanglement is the thing. Einstein, for one, didn't like it. For him, the ability of one particle to instantaneously affect the physical properties of a once related particle on what could be the opposite side of the universe was nothing less than spooky action at a distance. Physicists today are more relaxed with the idea, if only because, unlike Einstein, they worry less about its metaphysical side effects. Entanglement between particles, we now understand, exists everywhere, all the time. Once any two or more particles have interacted, it no longer makes sense to consider one in isolation, no matter how great their separation. The physical realities of these particles, such as their momentum and spin, are now decidedly shared properties. But the story of the entangled world does not stop at the subatomic. The latest research is a bolt from the blue. Researchers have located entanglement here in our big, wide, macroscopic world. While the discovery of entanglement between holmium atoms in a magnetic salt may not be everyone's idea of a heart stopper, the implications are far-reaching. The results suggest that if only we knew where to look, we would find the effects of entanglement elsewhere in the everyday world. Some go further. Some believe we will, in time, discover entanglement everywhere. Some argue we will find that entanglement is a consequence of anything with claims to a physical reality. Consider your own body, for example, and the countless interactions between the electrons in all of its atoms. Wouldn't it be surprising if it were anything less than a mass of entanglements? What about two related bodies, or two bodies in relationship? Wouldn't two masses of entanglements tangle? And what about two kindred consciousnesses? After all, entangled atoms make molecules. Molecules make biology. Biology makes life and all its attendant mystery. But even here, it seems, entanglement doesn't end. For recent research has uncovered an uncanny connection between past and future time. Think photons for a moment. Think polarization. Picture it. You're measuring a given photon's polarization. Done. Great. Phew. Polarization measured. You've got your result. Now measure the polarization again. Same photon. The news? The second measurement you take, or more precisely, the influence of the act of this second measurement on the photon, could well affect how that photon was polarized earlier. Yes, earlier. For time, it seems, too, can become entangled.
There was a tribe during the era of pre-Islam that used to make its gods statues from dates, dried dates. And they would make the statue because they would move this god with them. They didn't have big stones. They would make him from dates. And whenever there is a big period of drought, they wouldn't have any stuff to eat anymore. They would revert to the gods that they adore and would eat him to save themselves from hunger, starvation, because finally you have to survive. And in my opinion, if you compare it to the actual regimes, people have to survive. When you live under a theocracy or under a dictatorship, so bloody dictatorship, you have to survive. Sometimes you revert to God, sometimes you eat your God.
friends have said that if I make a film on atheism and or religion, religious belief, there's a good chance that I, myself, may become religious. So this film, this documentary in part, is a look at how an atheist like me becomes a religious person.
Je pense que le temps est infini. Je pense que le monde n'a jamais été créé. C'était la théorie d'Aristote, vous savez, c'est pas nouveau. Aristote, Einstein aussi, ont pensé que le temps était infini, que le monde était toujours en existence et sera toujours en existence. Et quand on voit les choses évoluer à l'intérieur du monde, bien sûr, on voit les galaxies, ça évolue, les étoiles, ça évolue, les hommes, ça évolue, les êtres animés, ça évolue. Mais chaque fois, cette évolution qui produit une galaxie qui naît à un endroit, il y a des galaxies qui meurent à un autre endroit. Statistiquement, peut-être, ça s'équilibre presque. Donc, je crois que c'est assez clair, c'est une évolution qui dure sur un temps infini et qui remonte vers un temps infini, c'est parfaitement plausible. Je ne vois pas pourquoi il y aurait une époque privilégiée de création.
So once you begin to pull the explanations of antiquity apart, there's a sense in which the whole enterprise collapses and we feel a great deal of anxiety.
What happened with the loss of religious belief, a loss that I thought through. It wasn't taken from me by anybody else. It was a loss that I came to through the process of my own rational thinking. With that loss, that meant the loss of an entire belief system, and a system that also, of course, included feelings and rituals and so on. An entire system that, until that time, had helped to give me a framework for understanding the universe, the world, and my place in it. That's the pain, I think.
Wonder isn't just about magic and going, ooh. Wonder is about wondering. Wonder is about asking questions fundamentally. So the one word wonder, it's also about this fundamental activity of human curiosity. And I always admire Angela Carter's work, the British novelist. She said something to the effect that curiosity is a moral function, and I think wonder is that kind of moral function. It's something we associate with another age, an age of wonder, the medieval period, strange things were happening. But I wanted to explore this age, this century, 21st century. I wanted to find where wonder lies for us, or where mystery lies for us, or where strangeness lies for us, because we think we're so in control.
The traditional claim for Jesus on the part of us Christians is that he is both fully divine and fully human. We spent an awful lot of our time trying to figure out how those two things could come together, and that's not easy. What I want us to see is that when we define Jesus as divine, lurking in our background is a theistic understanding of God. And when we define Jesus as human, lurking in our background is a particular anthropological understanding of the nature of human life. And I'd like to try to demonstrate that both the theistic understanding of God and the traditional anthropological understanding of what it means to be human have become bankrupt.
You might know about the ideas of Feuerbach, the 19th century philosopher. And he was trying to account for the ubiquity of religious belief. And he said, in effect, that human beings are God, that we make God, and that when we believe in God, what we are doing is projecting our greatest hopes and our most important ideals for ourselves into the heavens. So we say that justice is good, so there must be a God who's just. And we say that mercy is good, so there must be a God that is merciful. And we as human beings want to be powerful, and we want to know. So there must be a being who is supremely powerful and supremely all-knowing. He thought that that might help to explain the ubiquity of religious belief and might help to explain why human beings go on believing it generation after generation.
A serious religious believer is someone who believes in the existence of a God, of a single God, and then, depending on which of the three big monotheistic religions he or she belongs to, if you're a Jew, the only prophet of the Jews was Musa or Moses. If you're a Christian, then you believe that your monotheistic God was actually quite a philanderer, and that one of the people he had an affair with was a young Palestinian woman called Maryam. And while Joseph was away, he impregnated her with little Jesus or Isa. And so you believe in a trinity. There's God, there's the Holy Mother, who God entered in some mystical way, and there's Jesus, who's the son of this union. So, of course, serious monotheists mock this, because what they see it as is caving in to Roman ideas. Because Christianity was born in the pores of the Roman Empire, they thought having just one prophet or one God wasn't enough, given there were so many Roman ones, and so they needed a goddess. And Mary, or Maryam, became the goddess of the Christian faith. So that's what they believe in. And if you are born or into the Muslim faith, then you believe there is only one God. And though there were other prophets, there's only one messenger of God. And that messenger was Muhammad, the holy prophet of Islam, to whom God revealed many truths, and these truths were then incorporated in the Quran. So you can have your choice. You can all believe in monotheistic God, and then there are various ways you can go to him. And it is always a him, as we know. That is what I guess a believer is in monotheism, in the single God. There are people who believe in other things, of course. The Buddhists are atheist people because they don't believe there is a deity, but they believe in the Buddha. The Hindus used to believe, and still many of them do, in different gods and goddesses. But under the pressure of monotheism, Hinduism too is trying to develop its notion of a single powerful God, Ram, let us say. And this God determines everything. All the others are minor. They can't write all the other deities out because they're totally part and parcel of Hindu tradition. But they're certainly looking for something to compete with the big monotheisms, in particular Islam. Then you still have Aboriginal peoples who have ancient belief systems still, though they are few and far between. It's monotheism that determines the world.
There is a reality called God that I commune with that's beyond any capacity that I have to understand. I'm talking about the human experience of transcendence and wonder and something with whom I can commune that's bigger than I am. But the things about Jesus that impress me are not miracles or virgin births or cosmic ascensions. I think those are all after the fact. Those are attempts to explain what there was about this Jesus that was so unusual. And they didn't have a vocabulary to do it, so they took what they knew and exploded it. What I think is important about Jesus is that somehow in the experience of that Jesus, a guy like Paul can say, inside this Christ, the boundary that separates the Jew from the Gentile disappears. In Christ, there's neither Jew nor Greek. In Christ, there's neither male nor female. There was an experience in this man that lifted people beyond the security boundaries of human life. and gave them a sense of a whole new humanity. In the Pentecost story and the Christian faith, you literalize that story, it doesn't make any sense. But when you understand what they're trying to say, somehow in touch with whatever the Spirit of God is, humanity is expanded to the place that if you spoke Greek, then if I was to communicate with you, I would speak Greek, because you're getting outside the tribal boundaries that we kill each other, and you're beginning to enter into a new humanity. What impresses me about Jesus is that when he touches life, barriers disappear, whether they're sexual barriers or Jewish barriers or religious barriers. I mean, he embraced the leper. He violated the Sabbath. He constantly called people beyond the boundaries of their security systems, and religion is one human security system. The man who was very influential in my life was a German Lutheran theologian who was hanged by the neck by the Nazis. His name was Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Hanged just 2 weeks before the Allied Army freed the camp at Flossenburg. And he talks a lot in his letters from prison that have been published about what he calls finding a religionless Christianity. And I think that's exactly what I want to do. Because I think we've got to get out of the boundaries of religion if we're going to understand what Christianity is all about.
I think we tend to pride ourselves on thinking there's a neat divide between things that are of the imagination and things that are of the here and now, gritty, firm, with mass, solid, reliable, predictable, knowable. So we still pride ourselves. We've got the 18th century Enlightenment project hangover of thinking still in absolutes. Things like quantum gravity, for most people, even though it's huge now in the area of contemporary physics, for most people living, denizens of this age, it's still way out there. In our thinking, we're still very Newtonian.
Scientists, since even the antiquity, have been quite reluctant to God. Aristotle, who was certainly a very good physicist, wanted a universe which was always existing and always lasting. But you know, it's always interesting to put that question of God there as a symbol of religion. To me, it is not true. To me, God is only some way of speaking of the universality of the physical law. Physical laws in the universe are unique. And if it were not the case, we would not be able to do physics or to do anything.
So
that's the soul which is important. The religious people are believing in the immortality of the soul. That is with what I personally disagree.
Well, you see, theism is a human definition of God. It's not God. And I think that's where we've made the mistake. In our language, we say if you're not a theist, the only alternative is to be an atheist. What I say is that theism is a human definition of God, and atheism is a denial of the validity of that human definition. Neither of those is about God.
There has always been atheists in the Arab world, and it has a long tradition. It goes back to the heights of the Abbasid Empire, especially during its golden days. Many of the scholars, while studying the religion and philosophy, were accused of becoming atheists, and the most well-known from this school of thought were the Mu'tazila. Al-Mu'tazila at one point were discussing the issue of creation in opposition to a very famous school who believed that God directs everything, controls everything, and that a human has no power over his destiny. That was the Al-Jabriya, while the Al-Qadriya, from which the Mu'tazila came, believed that no, man has his own choice in life, that God doesn't control totally, and gradually the debate became more intense, and after a few decades, Al-Mu'tazila were becoming more and more clearly non-believers by insisting that man has control over his destiny, and finally they were banned and regarded as being atheists.
Well, in a curious way, it was the Punjabi Muslim poet Iqbal who tried to create a creator in his poems who was in favor of the poor of the earth and not a rich man's God. And there's a famous poem by Iqbal, which is a curious poem, and of course the clerics attacked it, in which Lenin dies and goes to heaven and meets God. And God says, "What is it, Lenin? You don't believe in me? Why? What were you trying to do?" And Lenin explains to God the conditions on earth, that this is how people really live, and God is very upset, and orders the Archangel Gabriel to do the following. And I'm now trying to remember the poem, that couplet. It says, I'll translate it for you. उठो मेरे दुनिया के गरीबों को जगा दो, काखे अमरा की दरो दीवार को हिला दो, जिस खेत से दहकाम को मुयस्सर ना हो रोज़ी, उस खेत का हर कोशा एक गंदम को जला दो. So in Iqbal's mind, Lenin's influence on God makes God a revolutionary, and God orders the Archangel Gabriel to go down to earth, awaken the wretched of the earth, shake the foundation of the houses and palaces of the rich, and on those fields from which the peasants who work them benefit absolutely nothing, burn every bushel of wheat you find. So that is Iqbal's humanistic view of God. So God, historically, is something people try and create in their own image because they are not satisfied with what they see on earth.
With the first Islam, the Islam of the Prophet, there was the search for equality and this thirst for social justice. One of the main actions of the Prophet were to distribute revenues among Muslims. So being a Muslim is also linked to becoming a citizen, receiving funds from the government to subsist. During that first period, they used to receive the assistance they need from the government, unlike what's happening now. So also this adds, it's not fear of letting God, because for people, God is an abstraction.
One form of atheism is simply the absence of a belief in God. But I think the more important form of atheism is what's sometimes called positive atheism, and that is having the belief that there is no God of any kind. An agnostic is somebody who's rather different, and I think there are also several forms of agnosticism. An agnostic is somebody, literally, who doesn't know whether there's a God. But somebody who self-identifies as an agnostic might do so for a number of different reasons, all of which I think are perfectly characterizable as agnostic. So for example, somebody might identify as an agnostic because he or she thinks that there is no way to decide whether or not God exists. Or somebody might identify as an agnostic because he or she thinks that the evidence for the existence of God is about equal to the evidence against the existence of God, so that as a result, one must suspend belief.
So agnostics usually face the wrath of both religious believers and atheists. And people say, make up your mind, Is there a deity or is there not?
Well, first of all, I'm not an atheist per se. I'm agnostic, meaning I think there is something, a force, you can call it God, nature, whatever, but I always hesitate, where did all this universe come from?
In the Islamic world, it is difficult for people to come out in public and say that they are atheists, because in many of these countries there are laws which prevent you from doing so. But despite that, many of them are what I would call secret or private or quiet or silent atheists. And I think probably it's difficult to, of course, prove this, but I have this very strong sensation, because I travel a lot to the Muslim world, that there are large numbers of people who are not believers. They are culturally Islamic and accept all that and the great gains of this civilization, but they are not believers in any sense of the word.
Being an atheist, I think in the Arab world is a luxury that most people cannot afford, because believing in God sometimes relieves people. I have seen people in a state of distress during the Lebanese war that were forced to return to God in some way or another. It was not a permanent return, but in a moment of weakness, someone would pray, God, please save me. So even the most ferocious leftist, communist, atheist, whatever you want to label them, they have this hesitation.
Well, I was never a believer. And I think from a very young age, as I've written in Clash of Fundamentalisms, I was an agnostic and developed soon into being an atheist. It didn't affect me in any other way except that I didn't take any religion seriously. And you know, the funny thing is, when I was growing up in Lahore and going to school and stuff, none of my friends were religious. You say this to people now and they're surprised, but at that time religion was not such a central thing. And I can't remember a single religious friend. There may have been some secret believers, but when they asked me, I had friends, you know, we used to talk as kids, do you believe or do you not believe? And it was never, do you believe in this religion or not believe in this religion, but do you believe there is a supreme being, a deity? And I would say, no, I don't believe. And none of them did either. I try and think back hard now when I think about those periods. At university, there were friends I had who were soft believers, but even then, not so many. So this is... it shouldn't surprise people, and it was the same the world over.
When you live under a ruler who is so ruthless like Saddam Hussein, that one single word could cause you to lose your life, not only you and all your family, you revert to God when you see that you are so powerless.
It's not easy to declare yourself publicly an atheist in the United States and probably still stand for office. I do not know of any US president in, say, the last 150 years who has been a declared atheist.
Wasn't Roosevelt a declared atheist?
He was certainly not a declared atheist, no.
Thomas Paine certainly was an atheist.
Yeah, but he was not the president of the United States. Yeah. So you had...
Jefferson, people say that he was an atheist.
Jefferson probably came closest to being a free thinker, but then we are now going beyond 150 years. I'm saying that over the last century or so, you've had, and very few senators who stand for office these days would declare in public that they're atheists, because the Christian right is so strong and religion is so widespread in that country that they would have some difficulty in getting elected. It's worth thinking about.
La foi est une valeur politique par définition. Parce que du moment où tu crois en quelque chose, tu crois détenir une réalité absolue que tu estimes qu'elle est vraie, qu'elle est incontestable. Donc, si toi tu crois que tu as raison, les autres, par définition, ont tort. Et comme ça, tu te mets dans une position supérieure à eux.
You will find that every time a religion says we have the truth, that they immediately start to kill anybody who disagrees with them. And that's in every tradition. Certainly the Christians have burned plenty of people at the stake throughout our life. We burned homosexuals at the stake. We burned heretics at the stake. We burned Jews at the stake. Because we thought we were doing it, religion had taught us that we were doing it for their own good. And the reason we burned them at the stake was that it gave them some time before they died so they'd have time to repent and be able to get to heaven. You know, that's a really twisted version of doing something good for somebody, it seems to me. But that's, you know, that's where we've been. So any system of economics or politics that denigrates any human being cannot be of God. So I'm opposed to that.
People give the name of God to anything they like. So I don't think that we have to deal with. Science does not deal with.
Okay.
Anyway, as a scientist, I don't deal with.
What do you deal with as a scientist?
With a chain of logic reasoning, which starts from observations or experiences from the natural world. And from that, we derive ideas from some intuition that we may have. And from the intuition, we build a theory by pure reasoning. And then the theory wants to predict new observations. And then people are asked to do the new observations, and so forth and so on.
For atheists today, there is a scientific way of understanding the world, how the world began. And you don't need to do what our forebears did in ancient times, which is to find myths. Each society in each culture had its own founding myths. And the founding myth of the Old Testament was very different to the founding myth of native people on the American continent, or native people who lived elsewhere in the world, in China, in Japan. And these founding myths were a way ancient societies tried to delve into their past, because the question, how did we come into being, remains an important question for many people. But for me, these questions were sorted out by the time we grew up. They were sorted out by Darwin, they were sorted out by Huxley, they were sorted out later by Marx and Freud. And so atheism is a way of looking at the world which is not religious, which doesn't believe there is any supreme being, and which logically believes that human beings themselves determine their own history. There is no outside force.
America is obsessed with truth. DNA taken from saliva is used to determine guilt, innocence, and much more. But when we question the existence of God, the only proof required is belief in belief.
But you can be an atheist and believe in neoliberal economics and the American empire. In fact, the United States, which is the other society, which is suffused with religion. I mean, the figures in the United States are quite stunning. 90% of Americans believe in the deity, 70% believe in angels, and 60% believe in Satan. And as the great German thinker, writer, genius, Goethe once said, if you believe in the devil, you are already in his pay.
Christianity is two things. It's a way of life and it's an institution. There's no question that the institution turns demonic. No question about that. And when I look at my institution, I see on the Catholic side the people saying our Pope is infallible, that is, we have the truth. I see on the Protestant side people saying my Bible is inerrant, we have the truth. No human being's got the truth. God is a mystery beyond the capacity of the human mind to embrace. So that, you know, I can't say there is no God, because that would be arrogant. That would mean I understand reality so deeply that I can say without any fear of contradiction that there is no God. Now, I think I can say that I don't think there's a God as we have understood God theistically. You know, I do live on the other side of Copernicus, and I do live on the other side of Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin. And I don't think that when religion is in conflict with something that's a way to experience life that's just true, that is, I'm not going to debate Darwin. DNA evidence has made it sure that Darwin, not in every detail, nobody's right in every detail, but the thrust of Darwin is correct. And so to spend my energy debating that, no, I haven't got time for that. And if people want to do that, they have to do it on their own time.
Si on regarde dans l'histoire, tous les problèmes qui ont été créés pour les intellectuels qui ont essayé de réconcilier la religion avec la rationalité, avec la raison, ils ont toujours eu des problèmes. Ben, on peut citer l'exemple de Ibn Rushd. C'est quelqu'un qui a été persécuté juste parce qu'il a essayé de démontrer que la religion ne doit pas être en contradiction avec la raison.
Jesus was assembled with a group of his followers, and there was not enough food for them. And some of his disciples came to him and said, what shall we do? We don't have enough food to feed these huge masses. And all they had were a few loaves and a few fishes, which had been brought by one young person, I believe. Jesus basically told them not to worry, and he went ahead and performed a miracle, so the story says, and multiplied the loaves and fishes so that there was enough there to feed all of the assembled multitudes. To religious believers, miracles look like part of the very heart of their belief. When you think of Christianity, it's built around miracles. A virgin birth, a young man who grew up to do miracles that convinced his followers, and then a man who was unjustly killed and yet came back to life and was taken up into heaven by his Holy Father. That's a religion that puts miracles at its core. If religious believers call back too many of their miracles, then in effect they're starting to give up their belief. So the vast majority of people who actually believe in God on this planet, I think, are committed to believing in miracles as events that are actually contrary to the laws of nature. Science has had an influence within the academy and has persuaded some theologians and probably many philosophers that the miracles that we read about in religious texts did not occur. Nonetheless, the belief in miracles as literal events that contradict the laws of nature is in fact something that's alive and well, not only among, I think, the vast majority of religious believers, but also within the academy, which is where one would think rational belief and the progress of science would have had the strongest effect. And furthermore, even if miracles are interpreted symbolically, miracles seem to have a kind of favoritism effect. You know, miracles happen to some people and not others. What kind of symbolic interpretation can we make of that? Do religious believers really want to make out God as somebody who is partial to some people and not others? Is that compatible with a God who is said to be the God of all people? I would wonder about that.
The University of Paris, early 13th century. My character, Julan, the sculptor, is at the moment just a young student who's been drawn to the University of Paris because he's heard that they teach the pagan philosophers. And that teaching has been banned by the Catholic Church officially, but the University of Paris is doing it. So he's quite excited by that. He goes there, gets involved in the world of both theology and philosophy, and things turn a bit sour, because the one philosopher who has in a way set his mind on fire is Avicenna, and suddenly everyone's doing an about face. All the church fathers are saying, no more, we're having none of this truck with Avicenna and Averroes, the two main sources for classical learning, because Avicenna became dangerous. Avicenna suggested, really, the import of philosophy was, we don't really need the church as an intercessionary vehicle between us and God. Okay? Avicenna is saying that we, in a sense, participate ourselves. And so here we've got Gilles as a young student thinking on his feet, at a tribunal, being put to a very big test, which could have devastating consequences for him. So this is the voice of Gilles, and he's speaking to the tribunal. What is hitherto innate is lifted from the fabric of reality by the act of ardent imagining, by the force of the desiring mind. And the metamorphosis, quiet or large, happens firstly on this plane of the imaginal world, the intermediate world between matter and spirit, of which Avicenna speaks. It is a real place, a peninsula between worlds. It is also man's only bridge to his own deification. He had, the bishop observed, helpfully walked into a trap of his own making. Gilles of Beauvais, do you believe Christ was born the Son of God? I believe he became the Son of God. Even the bishop, 25 years later, in the quiet of his rooms, felt the blood in his temples flare. Then you cannot believe that man's hopeful redemption lies in the grace of the miracle of the Holy Incarnation. No. Tell us, Gilles of Beauvais, wherein lies our salvation? I believe we are saved by Christ. You contradict yourself. I believe we are saved by the example of Christ's becoming. Not by his sacrifice on the cross, not by the grace of God at our moment of death. No. Do you not believe, as your Arab did, that Jesus Christ was in fact Christos Angelos, a deified or angelicized man, and not our Lord incarnate? With respect, Avicenna was not Arabian but Persian. He was born in the province of Bokhara. Arabic was his second language. Answer the question, is it true you believe Christ to have been a deified or an angelicized man?
All religious fundamentalisms share the same features. That if you look at rabbinical laws in Israel, they are probably tougher than Muslim laws for women trying to obtain a divorce. Really tough. But the two images I have in mind, which if you put them side by side and let people judge for themselves, that they happened within weeks of each other. I think about a year and a half ago, there was a trial in Bali in Indonesia of the Islamic fundamentalists, so-called, who had the Bali bombings killed lots of Australians. He went into court, smiled at his fans who were there, looked up at God, didn't deny a thing, and when the judge passed the sentence of death, he smiled again, looked up at God, and that was that. Now, this belief clearly goes so deep that what he is doing as a servant of God, that no rational discourse is almost possible with people whose belief goes that deep. Within that same fortnight, I saw images from the trial of a Christian fundamentalist in the United States who was on trial for killing a doctor who performed abortions and had participated in helping to organize bombing of abortion clinics in the States. He comes into court, he smiles at his supporters, he doesn't deny anything, he looks at the judge, he's sentenced, he's not the least bit fazed by the sentence, and he walks out. And if you show these images on a split screen, you will see that even the body language of these people is virtually the same. And it's something people should see because it breaks down the stereotypes of one religious fundamentalism being worse than another.
Quand on va concevoir le monde d'une manière athée, vous voyez, des régimes entiers aujourd'hui sur Terre n'auront aucune légitimité. Des régimes comme le régime saoudien, l'existence même d'Israël n'aura aucun sens. Parce que Israël, malgré que beaucoup de théologiens juifs disent que Israël ne doit pas exister selon leur interprétation du judaïsme, mais il faut le reconnaître. Le sionisme, c'est une idéologie qui a tiré ses fondements de la foi religieuse juive. Donc l'État d'Israël existe parce que Dieu a donné cette terre aux Juifs.
Well, I see it as you said, a direct result of Western imperialism and American imperialism, to be more precise, especially during the last half century. Because if you see who has broken the backbone of any Arab movement striving or struggling towards progress, towards Arab unity, towards modernity. If we take the example of Nasser, despite all his shortcomings and all his problems, but he launched a movement that was directed toward the future, toward being more rationalized. He tried to create an Arab modern state and to unify at least some Arab countries. And the Americans used Israel in the 1967 war to inflict a huge defeat to him. His army was no match for the Israeli army. It was in 48 true in 67, and it's still true until now. And this has launched, and I remember very well, there was a scholar, a Muslim scholar well known, Sha'rawi. Imam Sha'rawi said on an interview, it was on record, that after the 1967 defeat, because he was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood was harshly repressed by Nasser, especially after 56. He crushed them and sidelined them, and people were no longer following them. After having been a major political actor in Egypt and in the Arab world, they were totally sidelined during the 60s. And Imam Sha'rawi said on record that he prayed to God, he thanked God for defeating Nasser, because the Jews, who are people of the book, in Islam they are considered to be believers and people of the book, have defeated the atheist regime of Jamal Abdel Nasser. While Jamal Abdel Nasser was not an atheist in the true sense. He was a believer, but he was also a modernizer.
La forme du prosélytisme a changé. C'est plus un prosélytisme qui est fondé sur l'au-delà, mais c'est un prosélytisme qui prend des formes de démocratisation. On va apporter les droits de l'homme, on va apporter la démocratie, on va apporter le bien-être. Mais même comme vous avez sans doute entendu George Bush après le 11 septembre, il n'a pas parlé de... Quand il a parlé de sa réplique, il a parlé de croisade. Il s'est rétracté après qu'on lui a expliqué que ce mot-là va entraver l'entreprise américaine d'éradiquer le phénomène du terrorisme. Mais lui, il y croyait. Hein? Lui, il y croyait. Et il a même utilisé le terme « our way of life ». C'était quoi, « our way of life » Our way of life, c'est quoi? C'est notre religion. C'est une religion.
Let's not forget that the alliance, the major alliance after the alliance with Israel in the Arab world, is between the United States and Saudi Arabia, which is the most strict, the most retrograde interpretation of Islam that has ever existed. In all Muslim history, There is no such interpretation of Islam like Wahhabism. And the Americans have been allied with the Saudi regime, the Wahhabite regime, since 1933, since the famous meeting between Roosevelt and King Abdulaziz.
At a particular point in Pakistan's history, when the military dictator of the time, General Zia-ul-Haq, closely linked to the United States, was busy waging a jihad in Afghanistan, the military and its intelligence organizations actually helped to create a whole number of extreme right-wing jihadi groups in that country in the late 70s and 80s to wage the so-called jihad in Afghanistan against the Soviet occupation. Prior to that, the religious parties in Pakistan, whenever elections were permitted, barely got 5% of the vote. They were given strong backing from the state, and all secular and progressive forces were either repressed or crushed or marginalized or banned, and so the religious groups acquired more strength. That's a fact of life, both in Pakistan and in Egypt and in other parts of the world. These jihadis were strong allies and much needed allies of the American empire to wage the jihad against its godless enemies.
I always compare it to a pressure cooker. The pressure cooker, as long as you have the lid, whatever pressure is inside, it remains inside. You cannot see what's inside, and what's inside cannot overflow. Once you remove the lid, you will see all sorts of things. And the lid was Saddam in Iraq. It is the Assad family in Syria. It is Hosni Mubarak in Egypt. These lids that have, put enormous pressure inside the cooker on these poor ingredients, the vegetables. And after cooking these vegetables, they are so soft, they don't think. And that's the actual situation in these countries.
At the French Revolution, most of the priests were forbidden. Only those who were accepting the new rules were accepted. Teaching religion was completely impossible. I cross every day in Paris. I am living in Paris. I cross every day a street named Rue Catherine. It was indeed Rue Sainte Catherine. And you see on the old stone the saint which has been taken out by the revolution. They have been killing all kinds of religious implications everywhere. Indeed, the priests were almost disappeared when Napoleon came. The Catholic Church was almost reduced to zero. But then Napoleon, as a gesture, wanted to have the blessing of the Pope and also wanted to respond to some of the people of France who felt unhappy about the priests having disappeared. Then he re-established the religion, but it has never been so strong as it was in the beginning of the revolution. During the revolution, really, no religion was really very tolerated. Then, after that, it was very difficult for religion to come back to the very imperial status they had during the old regime. During the old regime, due to the religious influence, many people have been accused of heresy, accused of blasphemies, and they have been killed or condemned, etc. It was certainly not possible afterwards.
La science, ça relève du domaine du matériel. C'est-à-dire, elle fournit une explication mécanique des phénomènes naturels, quel que soit le phénomène, quelle que soit sa nature. Mais la science ne peut pas fournir un arsenal de conditions, de valeurs morales qui peuvent gérer une société.
I don't think that there's any evidence that atheists or agnostics are any less moral than religious believers. And of course, it's all too easy to point to examples of religious believers who have been utterly immoral. Now, it is true that religious belief has tended to be a fairly efficient way of inculcating moral systems of certain sorts. But the fact that it's efficient doesn't mean that it's the best way. And in particular, some religious systems have inculcated beliefs including, for example, the inferiority of women, the inferiority of entire groups of people based upon race or skin color or ethnicity. So the moral systems that religious beliefs have put forward have sometimes been absolutely immoral. I think that it's far preferable for human beings to be quite clear on the fact that the point of morality is to help us to live well. And by us, I mean all of us, all human beings, and I would add, all beings, whether they're human or not, all living beings. So if that's the purpose of morality, we don't need a religious system to convince us about how to be moral. And then I would ask, is there anything else that's lost if we give up belief in God? There certainly is, in some ways, a wonderful history of beautiful architecture around the world that has been religiously inspired, wonderful art and wonderful music that's been religiously inspired. But we will still have those, even if we don't believe in God now. I can still enjoy going to other countries and looking at religious art. I don't share the same beliefs that their makers had, but I can still enjoy the greatness of the art. Those gifts are human gifts, and we can go on creating the same great culture, even if we don't suffer with the illusion of religious belief.
La quasi-totalité des lois dans le monde, entre guillemets, civilisé, c'est des lois positives. C'est des lois faites par les hommes. C'est des lois qui ont leurs limites. Mais quand même, on est loin des lois religieuses qui brûlaient les gens, qui légitimisaient le fait de brûler des gens vifs ou d'envoyer des gens juste parce qu'ils ont dit que la terre tournait à la guillotine.
À l'époque du début du christianisme, il y a eu des prêtres qui ont développé l'idée que la terre était plate, parce que dans la Bible c'est comme ça. Rien n'empêche ça. Et ils ont construit des modèles où le soleil tourne autour de la terre, on peut arrêter le soleil, Josué a arrêté le soleil. Et ça, évidemment, c'était même contraire à la science du temps de cette époque-là. On savait déjà depuis longtemps que la Terre était sphérique, on savait déjà depuis longtemps qu'il n'était pas absurde de penser que que la Terre tournait autour du Soleil et pas l'inverse. Donc ça, c'est un premier exemple, si vous voulez. Le deuxième exemple, c'était lorsque Galilée a fait ses premières observations. Les montagnes de la Lune, c'était peut-être plus grave pour la réputation de Galilée, qu'il ait trouvé des montagnes dans la Lune, c'était plus grave que d'accepter le système de Copernic. C'est-à-dire de penser que la Terre tournait autour du Soleil. Et on peut dire récemment, la bataille, surtout aux États-Unis, mais qui sait où ça va s'étendre, entre le créationnisme, qui est d'inspiration religieuse, on ne peut pas dire le contraire, et l'évolutionnisme darwinien. Je crois que l'Église est aussi en retard considérablement. Alors on essaye de nous faire avaler l'intelligent design et ce n'est évidemment pas quelque chose de scientifique.
Everything in the universe looks so beautifully designed. It has such wonderful patterns. It must have been caused by a cosmic designer. Human beings, in fact, did not all come into existence along with all the other animals simultaneously about 6,000 years ago, but rather that there's a huge history of the evolution of human beings and all other living beings from tiny single-celled organisms right up to the complex beings that we are today. I think that has been very effective in taking away the idea of creation as being a one-time event that made the world all at once. So it's taken away a lot of the very literal religious believers who have thought that a very literalist creation account is believable. I think it has made some believers revise their notion of God, so that as a result, there are some believers out there who say, well, God created the universe, but He created it via the Big Bang. He got everything rolling, and everything then unfolded from there, including through the processes of evolution that gradually created human beings.
Je pense que toutes les idées sur le Big Bang sont très difficiles à accepter pour moi. Beaucoup de gens l'acceptent, mais je suis convaincu que dans l'acceptation que beaucoup de gens ont, il y a encore cette nostalgie de la création divine. Et le pape Pie XII, qui était pape dans les années qui ont suivi immédiatement la guerre, la Seconde Guerre mondiale, a dit le Big Bang, c'est le Fiat Lux. Fiat Lux, c'est le Fiat Lux de la création de la Bible. Et le Big Bang, c'est la théorie moderne. Assimiler l'un à l'autre, ça me paraît très exagéré. Je ne pense pas que tous les scientifiques qui croient au Big Bang pensent que c'est exagéré, mais je pense que c'est quand même le cas. Au début de la théorie, elle était simple. Avec presque pas de paramètres, vous pouvez rendre compte de 3 phénomènes importants. L'expansion apparente de l'univers, vous pouvez rendre compte en même temps de l'abondance en éléments légers dans l'univers, c'est un test excellent, et vous pouvez aussi rendre compte du rayonnement cosmologique. Mais au fur et à mesure que les observations se sont développées depuis, on a pris ce système qui était à l'origine simple, et on l'a compliqué peu à peu en ajoutant la grande unification, en ajoutant l'inflation, en ajoutant la supersymétrie, en ajoutant maintenant la théorie des cordes. Et chaque fois, c'était quand même on a gardé le cadre du Big Bang traditionnel, et on a changé le minimum, on a rajouté. Mais le résultat n'est pas satisfaisant du tout. Pas encore. Donc on est encore avec un Big Bang qui aura besoin de pas mal de réparations si on veut le maintenir.
What's rational about
Darwin?
About Darwin? I mean, he happens to be true. You know, he got it right. He was a breakthrough. So was Isaac Newton. So was Galileo. I mean, there's been mountaintop breakthroughs of people who have seen the world differently. And so when their point of view gets established, you got to look at the world from a whole different perspective.
Marx, of course, thought that religion functions as a way to keep people quiescent, that religion is one of the best systems to keep people from rebelling against the current limitations of their lives, and particularly if you are a peasant or a serf, if you are a working class person who is being exploited by a corporation or by an agricultural boss. One of the best ways to keep you quiet, to keep you working, and to keep you acquiescing in your exploitation is to be told that God wants it that way, that you were made by God to do this work, and that someday, after your death, you will get the grand reward that is waiting for you. If somebody were to come along and somehow give me a fabulously strong and convincing argument to show that all the reasoning I've been through so far was wrong, I don't think this is ever going to happen, but if it were to happen, I would not be disappointed. I'd be pleased. I'd be happy to know I was wrong. I don't think I am wrong, but I'm open to the possibility.
The music is utterly terrifying.
I didn't go looking to lose my belief. It was the path of rational thinking that took me there. I didn't say to myself, I hate religion, I hate the church, I want to get out of here. What happened was the world was opened up to me by philosophers, and I followed that path of reasonable thinking, and that took me to atheism.
Il y a une réaction contre la science.
Vous menacez beaucoup de monde, quoi.
nous menaçons beaucoup de morts. Non, mais de façon générale, l'utilisation abusive de la science n'est pas le fait des savants, n'est pas le fait des chercheurs, c'est le fait des politiques ou des militaires. Einstein n'a jamais prévu l'utilisation militaire de la bombe atomique, beaucoup plus tard en tout cas. Ce n'est pas. Galilée n'a jamais prévu l'utilisation des fusées. Pourtant, ça sort du principe d'inertie galiléen. Beaucoup de choses sont comme ça. Donc, c'est vrai que la science apparaît aujourd'hui comme, entre guillemets, dangereuse. Dans la bombe atomique, les manipulations génétiques, le sida, tout ce genre de choses, et beaucoup d'autres phénomènes encore, semblent montrer que la science est dangereuse. Ce n'est pas la science qui est dangereuse, ce n'est pas la recherche, c'est les applications faites par des politiques et souvent sous la pression des politiques ou sous la pression des militaires. Ce n'est pas les scientifiques qui poussent. Quelquefois, ils en profitent parce qu'ils ont plus de crédit quand ils travaillent sur des choses qui peuvent avoir des applications militaires ou civiles non désirables. Mais ce n'est pas eux qui poussent.
What caused God? Do we really need to make God the cause of the universe, or are we simply pushing the problem back farther? Because if it's legitimate to ask what caused the universe, then it's also legitimate to ask what caused God. And if the answer is nothing caused God, God is self-causing, then I would wonder, why can't we say nothing caused the universe?